And welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Amy Dash, and we are covering the trial of Tex McIver, a prominent Atlanta attorney who is accused of shooting and killing his wife intentionally, though he says it was just a freak accident. I'm here with Editor-in-Chief of Law and Crime, Rachel Stockman. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was just a wow day because you have this witness who is supposed to be the prosecution's witness, and she's basically testifying for the defense.
It seems that this is destroying the prosecution's entire motive, that this was all about the money, that Tex McIver wanted his hands on it. But then if he changes his will and he gives all of that money over to his godson, what was the motive?
You know what? I'm struggling to see why the prosecution called this woman. It must have been because they felt like they had no other choice, and they knew the defense was going to call her if they didn't. However, she testified to the fact that after Tex killed Diane, a couple of months after that, he actually went in and changed her will, not to give him the ranch that
to give it to the godson.
But to give it to the godson.
Correct. In lieu of his own children. By the way.
Very damaging testimony for the prosecution.
Yeah, but so let's go back to court now. We hear that this witness is still in the stand with some critical testimony. Let's listen to the mother of the godson, who's supposed to inherit the entire estate.
So, what is written in here in terms of how everything would be fulfilled?
To include Austin receiving any residual estate from the defendant.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Harvey, anything else? No, sir. Ms. Schwab, thank you for your time. You are free to go. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start our lunch break now. It is 10 minutes to 1. We've been doing fine with 45. Well, it seems like you've been doing fine with 45 minutes. I don't mean to assume that we'll keep working. Any reason we shouldn't do the same thing? Seeing some thumbs up and nod. So why don't we try to be back here at 1:35. 1:35 to pick up with whatever's coming next in our direction. Enjoy your lunch. It's a little blustery out there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't get some fresh air. Don't talk about the case. No outside research. See you in a little bit. Thank you. All rise for the jury.
And you just heard some critical testimony that could have potentially changed the entire course of the rest of this case. I'm here with Rachel Stockman. She is the editor-in-chief of Law and Crime Live. So this was the mother of the godson who testified that really Tex and his wife Diane both loved this little boy so much. And after Diane died, she says that Tex came to her and said, listen, I want to do right by my wife. I want to meet her in heaven. And if I don't change this will and leave everything to your son, I don't think that I'll make it to heaven to be with my wife.
And that's why I was saying to you earlier, Amy, before we went to the break there, that I really don't understand how this woman was a prosecution witness, because you have to keep that in mind. Sure. This is the time the prosecution's presenting their case, trying to convince the jurors that this guy, Tex McIver, is a murderer. And here you have a woman who's very close to Tex McIver saying, no, he actually changed the will to make my son the benefactor of this ranch. It's not good testimony for the defense.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out, though, if the prosecution was caught by surprise, because we just saw the prosecutor get very hostile with this witness and essentially accuse her of sharing information about that second will with the defense, meaning that if she didn't go to the defense and go and confide in Tex about that second will, maybe it wouldn't have come into the trial, and the prosecution seems upset about that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end there, as we were going to break, you saw some very testy moments between the witness and the prosecutor, where she was basically trying to say, you know, you're a hostile witness. Excuse me, the prosecution was trying to prove that she was a bit of a hostile witness to the prosecution, and that she was going and turning around and telling everything that happened between her and the state's investigators, telling Tex McIver's attorneys about what happened.
Yeah, but then his attorneys got up there. Bruce Harvey said, well, listen, you and I both know that a witness doesn't belong to either side. There are no loyalties here, so you're free to talk to whoever you want. Let's listen to a quick clip right now of this mother of the godson testifying about what Tex said to her after his wife died about changing this will.
Oh, well, there were a lot of people in the stands.
Related to your kind of circle of friends and supporters.
I'm not, I can't remember who might have been there.
Okay. And how did the conversation come up at Austin's baseball game in October, November 2016?
He said that he had changed his will, and that he knew this is what they both wanted, that they didn't get around to it, and that he wanted to make it right by her, or she wouldn't let him into heaven.
Okay.
She wasn't going to let him into heaven if he didn't uptake the will.
And can you tell the jurors, did he give you, did you talk about whether or not Austin had been contained in his prior estate planning? Did you talk about that at that time?
No.
So, can you tell the jurors, did the defendant ever provide you with a copy of his new changed will?
So you can hear word for word what Tex McIver said to her. Rachel, is there a possibility that this was all part of the plan?
That this was all part of Tex McIver's plan?
Yeah, that he's trying to cover because he knows he could potentially be in trouble here, and he's trying to take steps to show that, hey, I love my wife.
Okay, here's my problem with that, Amy, is that, okay, maybe you could argue that if there was some evidence leading up to the actual shooting that Tex McIver wanted his wife's dead. As far as I can see, though, there's no evidence of motive there. Yeah, were some of his actions he took after the shooting highly suspect? Absolutely. Telling the lone witness to lie, that she wasn't really there, not good. You know, leaving a voicemail at her husband's machine, not good either.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some suspicious behavior, but like you said, after the fact, we're not seeing hard evidence of planning leading up to. We're going to come back and talk to a criminal defense investigator who's going to analyze all of this right after this break. So stick with us because we are going to dissect all of this live testimony and say, what does it mean for the prosecution and the defense's case right after this? Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Amy Dash, and I'm joined by our editor-in-chief here, Rachel Stockman. And we also have a criminal defense investigator on the line, Charles Mittelstadt. Charles, are you there?
I'm here.
Nice to see you. There you are.
Good to see you.
So, what we're trying to get to the bottom of here is, was this cold-blooded? Was it meticulously planned? Was it a murder? Or was it just a freak accident? So, if you are working with the defense, what are you investigating from the start to try to prove that this man did not intend to shoot and kill his wife?
Well, this case can really be broken down into two sections, Amy. First, you have the physical evidence and the ballistic evidence in the case, and there's nothing physically or ballistically about this incident that precludes the possibility that this was an accident. So now we have to shift to the second aspect, which is going to be the testimonial evidence and also the circumstantial evidence in the case. In other words, how can we put ourselves in Tex's head and try to understand whether there was some sort of motive or exactly whether there was any intent on his part. And so that's really what all this is about. And the prosecution is, had been really, in my opinion, struggled to make that leap beyond a reasonable doubt. They've had this last witness that we listened to, Ann Schwall, really became a defense witness. And
absolutely.
She initially, you could see in Clint Rucker's demeanor how initially he was handling her in one manner, and then at some point after Bruce Harvey's cross-examination, he treated her as a hostile witness.
Oh, absolutely. He got very frustrated with her. Absolutely. Rachel, would you say that this was a complete turning point?
I think it was a really big turning point in the case. But Charles, maybe you can explain this to Amy and I, because we don't quite get it. Why did the prosecution call Ms. Schwal as one of their witnesses?
I don't think they expected her to testify the way she did.
How did she help the prosecution's case? I don't see it.
Well, I think they may, there's a couple of possibilities. They may have been forced to, knowing that the defense was going to call her, because she's actually an excellent defense witness. She completely undercuts the state's theory of their prosecution, which is that this was a financially motivated crime, and therefore that was the premeditation involved. She's basically saying, look, he, even in spite, post-mortem, he actually independently changes the will. He didn't have to do that. He actually goes and alters the will in order to meet Diane's wishes, and the focus being entirely on Austin Schwal, because that's what she wanted. And so I think that's huge. You know, we also saw the same thing happen with the previous witness several days ago, Mr. Stringer, if you recall. And he was a close friend of Diane's, and it was also very clear that his testimony initially started out one way, and even though he was kind of a quirky witness, very difficult to kind of wrangle, he ultimately wound up being a great defense witness. And in that case, he completely undercut the notion that there was anything different that happened on that day. Stringer testified about the demeanor at Longhorns, testified about their relationship, that it was anything but love between these two individuals. And so, you know, we've kind of seen this happen throughout this case so far, is that this sort of testimony is very nuanced in nature. I think it's very, very difficult for a jury to follow some of this stuff, because each witness, as is the case in any circumstantial case, you really have to look at it in its totality. There's not one witness that's going to deliver on this case for the prosecution, but even amongst each individual witness, there's so much nuance, and there's so much kind of yin and yang. I mean, they score a few points, but then they're taken away. They lose. You know, they score 2 points and then they lose 3 points in the process.
Yeah, and we even saw
we saw
with the critical eyewitness who was in the car, Danny Jo Carter. She even said right after it happened, when she was being interviewed by police, she said it was an accident. Let's listen to some of her testimony and come back and discuss what it all meant.
And can you tell the jurors, do you have a specific recollection of where you were at the time that the gun actually went off?
I was either at 12th Street at this intersection or at 14th Street.
Would you put the phone down for just 1 second? And I'm going to ask you, if you would please, would you come over and would you, you recognize this to be a demonstrative aid, right? Mm-hmm. And yes?
Yes.
Okay. And can you share for the jurors the demonstrative aid that we see in the courtroom? Is it similar in any way to the actual vehicle that you were driving that night?
Very similar.
And can you tell the jurors how so? All different ways if you can.
Bucket seats. Yeah, the seats were behind it. The color's almost the same. It looks like that says King Ranch, which is the style car that it does. So it's very similar to the vehicle that we were in.
Okay, how about the console itself?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to ask you if you would please occupy this demonstrative aid where you would have been that night. Okay. And this Raji stepped out, so we would ask Ms. Griffin if you would position Ms. Griffin in a place where Tex McIver would have been in the vehicle. And I'm going to ask Mr. Abadi if he would please come and assist us, and if you would position him in the vehicle where the defendant would have been. Okay, so we are at the intersection of 12th, could be 14th Street, and can you tell the jurors Did you actually see Diane McIver pass what you believe to be a gun when the defendant asked for it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And could you show the jurors where it was, well, how did that happen?
We were sitting at another intersection, and I was sitting here with both wheels on the both hands on the steering wheel. And when he asked her to pass him the gun, she opened the console, and I looked in there, and I didn't see it.
Okay. And can you explain to the jurors why didn't you see it?
It was in a plastic bag.
And you didn't know that?
No.
When did you realize that the gun was in a plastic bag?
He said that it was in a plastic bag.
Who did?
Tex did.
At what point did he say the gun was in a plastic bag?
Diane said, when he said, "Darling, hand me my gun," Diane said, "Tex, I don't even know where your gun is." And he said, "It's in the console." And she opened the console, and I looked down and I didn't see it. He said, "It's in the plastic bag." And then she picked it up and handed it to him.
Picked it up and handed it to him. I want to show you an exhibit. It is marked for purposes of the record. The box is marked as State's Exhibit 369, and for purposes of the record, Your Honor, I will sub-mark the weapon itself as 369A. And as the court knows, it has been checked by Deputy Murphy, and this weapon has been made safe. Let me just ask you to take a look at this weapon and tell the jurors whether or not you recognize this particular weapon.
I do.
An in-court demonstration, the eyewitness who was in the car when Diane McIver was shot and killed, going through exactly what happened step by step. I'm with Charles Mittelstadt. He is a criminal defense investigator. Charles, was there enough substantial evidence to even bring this murder charge in the first place, would you say?
Again, the case was originally charged as a involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct case. And what changed that, Amy, was there was a bond violation. They found a gun during a search warrant. They found a gun, and that's what changed the whole case. And then they launched into this theory that there's something more to it, and ultimately it ended up in a murder indictment. So, what is that evidence? We now are learning, based upon this witness, Ann Schwall, that it's clear the prosecution was proceeding on this theory that it was a financially motivated crime, and we now know that they learned some time ago that really that motive really didn't exist. That Tex fully intended on fulfilling, and again in a post-mortem fashion, intended on fulfilling the wishes of his deceased wife. In spite of the fact that he wasn't required to. Yeah. And if he was financially motivated by this and he wanted to have the ranch and everything else, then why would he do that?
Exactly.
And so you got to question all
Charles,
this
we have to go to a quick commercial break, but we're going to come back and talk about that right after this, because now, what is the motive? Is the prosecution in deep water here? And how will they overcome it? Please stay with us as we come back with in-depth analysis of this murder trial out of Atlanta. And welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Amy Dash. I'm here with our editor-in-chief, Rachel Stockman, and we have a criminal defense investigator, Charles Mittelstadt, on the line with us as well. Well, the prosecution has to prove intent here. That's what it's all about. They've tried to do that by basically analyzing everything that Tex McIver has said since his wife died, every tear that he has shed. Do you think it has been effective, Rachel? Have they met their burden of proof yet, or are they even coming close here?
They have not even come close, Amy, in my opinion. There's a lot of reasonable doubt left in this case in terms of, did Tex McIver have the intent, form the intent to murder his wife? Now, I think leading up till today, I think they put some seeds of, okay, what's Tex McIver doing here? A person that's innocent doesn't tell someone to lie, doesn't leave a voicemail and then tell someone to erase it, ask a key witness to change a story.
But you brought up a good point, though, Rachel. You told me, listen, this guy's an attorney. Maybe that informed his decision-making here, because the first thing he said is, this isn't going to look good for me. I know how these things go down. And he called his attorney right to the hospital.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. Everyone reacts differently when you have a situation like this. Did he do some things that were suspect? Absolutely. Does that mean he intended to murder his wife? I don't think so.
Charles Mittelstadt, you know the defense attorneys in this case personally. What do you think their strategy will be? Will they even put on a case, or will they just hammer home reasonable doubt?
You know, at this point, it seems to me a little inconceivable that Tex would testify. His testimony has essentially already come out. It's come out through several state's witnesses, and I don't see any reason why they would subject him to cross-examination at this point. It's just way too big a risk, and really his statements have all been explained through Danny Joe in particular, through Bill Stringer, through a number of witnesses that the state has put on so far. So I don't find that it's going to be necessary for him to testify.
But Charles, there was so much emphasis on the fact that he wasn't emotional enough, that his grieving was not what you would typically expect of a husband that just lost his wife. Wouldn't the testifying be an opportunity for him to get up there and just show waterworks, just gain the sympathy of the jurors?
I think he's actually done that. I've noticed several times throughout this trial that when the camera has panned to him, that he has, on numerous occasions, he has teared up. And it's very clear to me that it's sincere and that he's very, very affected still by the loss of his wife. I'm confident the jury has seen that, so I don't think you would put him up for that purpose. That's already happened.
Rachel.
And I'm kind of with Charles here. The problem, at first we had heard that Tex McIver may actually be called as a defense witness, but I'm with Charles in that I think it would be a very bad move at this point, because much as Charles said, the testimony has come out, his motivation for doing certain acts, but also Tex could get hammered during cross-examination by the prosecution about some of these kind of odd things he did after Diane died. I think it would be a big mistake.
But wouldn't it also, Charles, just to play devil's advocate, be an opportunity for him to explain some of the things that might otherwise seem bizarre?
They just haven't risen to the level, I believe, to warrant the risk associated with him. He would get hammered because he has done some things, frankly, that have not been in his best interest. Frankly, I attribute it to the fact that he is an attorney, and attorneys sometimes will overthink in these circumstances because they know that you can't leave these things to chance, that things don't always work out the way they're supposed to. Cops make mistakes. Prosecutors sometimes engage in misconduct or have their own agendas. Judges make bad rulings. Juries don't always reach the right verdict. So here's a guy who's an attorney. He's used to shaping narratives. He's used to controlling spin. And I think that's probably more than anything responsible for why he made these decisions. And listen, he's put himself in this position. It's his bad judgment. It's his trying to silence witness, trying to shape a narrative that actually got him here. If he had kept his mouth shut and followed advice of counsel from the beginning, not sat for AJC interviews, not subjected himself to an interview while in custody, I don't think we'd even be here.
Which is surprising. I was just going to say, it's surprising behavior for an attorney, especially when you're trying to paint as a cold-blooded mastermind here, right? Let's listen to a clip of Danny Jo Carter, who was in the car when Diane McIver was shot by her husband, as she takes us through exactly what happened and what was said in the moments leading up. Very important, so listen.
Like it's locked, and I looked at mine and my door lock was up, so I hit the button and locked the doors, and I said, no, now they're locked. And I think that's the last thing that she said.
Before?
I heard a big boom, and I didn't know what it was. I thought there was an explosion somewhere, and but my head turned to the right, and I looked out the window and wondered where there was an explosion, or if somebody behind us was getting ready to hit us, or something had happened behind us. I did not realize that that it was a gunshot right away.
How did it sound?
It was loud.
And so can you tell the jurors what happened next?
Diane turned around, like, she turned around. That's why she flung around and she says, Tex, what did you do?
Tex, what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
And did he say anything?
He said the gun discharged.
And so, what did you do when Diane McIver turned around to look?
When she turned around, I turned around and realized seconds. This was all happening in seconds. And I saw a puff of smoke and I could see his hands. And I could see the top of the gun, I could see part of the gun, his hands, and some of the bag.
Okay.
And his hand was moving like this.
Show the jurors again what you saw.
Something like this.
And that's Danny Jo Carter. She was in the car as Diane McIver expressed utter shock after she realized that she had been shot by her own husband. Rachel, this testimony of right in the moments leading up to the shooting, he says, darling, can you hand me the gun? And she hands it to him.
Right.
Does that support his case? Why would she hand him a gun if they had been arguing or she felt that he could be a danger to her?
Well, his reason for wanting the gun is that they had pulled off the highway into a bad neighborhood. He felt unsafe. And he wanted the gun to protect himself. And honestly, hearing the type of guy he was, a gun-toting Southern gentleman, not too surprised that he'd want a gun in a bad neighborhood or what he perceives as a bad neighborhood.
Yeah, and there were other testimony, other statements from witnesses that support that. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and we're going to see how he reacted after he shot his wife. What did he do? What did he say? Did he try to get her help? We will be back with the testimony that we heard live earlier in the courtroom, as well as testimony from the whole trial that we've been covering. So stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm Amy Dash here with our editor-in-chief, Rachel Stockman, and we have criminal defense investigator Charles Mittelstadt on the line. You just heard some earlier testimony of Danny Jo Carter. She was the main witness in this case, and she says that Diane McIver hands the gun to Tex McIver. His story is that he fell asleep. When he woke up, he realized they had gone on a detour. She had gotten off of the highway, and he said something to the effect, according to witness testimony, of, girls, I really wish you hadn't done something like this, showing that he was scared. Then he falls asleep again. Danny Jo Carter says Diane locks the door, and suddenly she hears a boom. Charles, is there anything in that scenario that would lead you to believe, or that could even support the prosecution's case, that this was all planned?
Well, I think there's two things that are significant from that testimony. First, in order to follow the prosecution's theory, that means that Tex would have had to inform the intent the moment they got off that expressway, because that wasn't part of the plan. So if you want to believe their theory, that means that the moment they got off, he saw this opportunity to bring out the gun and to claim that he was in fear for his safety, and that his intent formed at that moment, and he intended on carrying out the crime.
Which would still count. It would still count toward intent. It
certainly would, but you'd have to be thinking on the fly. So, but it's a significant aspect of their theory. The second thing that we heard from Danny Jo's testimony was we heard her describing this click, click, click. And what that was it was Diane who was attempting to lock her door. And then, as you heard her say, she was pressing it the wrong way. And so Danny Jo ultimately locks the door. But what that tells us is that Diane, completely independent of Tex, had her own concerns. It wasn't at Tex's urging that she locked the door. She did that independently. And that's also significant because the prosecution's trying to contend that there was no danger, that there was really nothing going on, there was nothing situationally going on that really should have caused him to have taken the extreme measure of asking for a gun and arming himself.
Rachel, there's been a lot of focus on his sleep disorder, whether he actually had one or not. Do you think that the defense should focus on that, or will they try to focus on the fact that he was scared, and if he fell asleep and there's a gun in his hands and he awoke, that fear resurfaced in that very moment and possibly caused him to pull the trigger?
Listen, I don't use guns, so I don't know the ins and outs of how this would work. The defense has testified that it was in a certain mode that had a hair trigger to it, and so when he awoke, it went off accidentally.
But there's no evidence to support that, so we don't know if it was cocked or not. We are waiting to hear from ballistics experts about that.
And in the video that we saw last week in court, where he talked to investigators shortly after this, he did not mention that sleep disorder that was mentioned later by the defense. So that doesn't bode well for the defense. But again, you know, this case is all about as Charles and you have said, Amy, did he form the requisite intent? And
Sure.
I just don't see it yet. Like Charles said, he would have to have formed it the second that they pulled out of the highway into that bad area, and we don't see that evidence yet.
Charles, let's say that the gun was cocked. Is it believable that a gun aficionado such as himself would accidentally pull the trigger of a gun? We had heard testimony that he was normally very cautious with his handling of guns. And does it matter, Charles, that this gun was still in a plastic bag?
Well, that's going to be the real battle between the experts. So there's this. I'm very familiar with the gun. It's a Smith & Wesson revolver. It's a .38 caliber. It's a model 638, and there are things that are unique about that gun. It's a single and double action simultaneously. And so in the single action, it's one trigger pull. In the double action, it's a different trigger pull. In one case, it's 12 pounds, and that's what the prosecution is contending, is that it would have required at least 12 pounds of pressure to pull that trigger. It's not plausible to me that that could have been the case. I don't think the defense can sell this notion that he accidentally pulls a 12-pound trigger. So it would have had to have been cocked. And in that case, you're going to hear the defense will present their own expert. They have a forensics ballistic expert by the name of Chris Robinson that I anticipate will testify. And I expect that the trigger will be as little as 2.5 pounds. Generally, that trigger, by all accounts, if it's not modified, is sub 4 pounds. But in this case, I think it could be as little as 2.5 pounds, which is a hair trigger. In fact, if you look at reviews online about this gun specifically, over and over, there is commentary about the fact that it's almost too light of a trigger.
But Rachel, then my question is, why is he cocking it and falling asleep with a cocked gun?
Okay, that is my question.
That seems out of character.
Yes, and that is exactly what I wanted. Maybe Charles, since he's familiar with this type of weapon. If you're someone that has taken gun safety classes and you are, a concerned citizen that has used weapons before, why would you cock your gun at the back of a car in a bad neighborhood?
Therein lies the reckless part, right? That is the recklessness of all this, and that's what you can't get away from. Is that is not good gun safety, right? You wouldn't put a cocked, loaded revolver, which has no safety, in a console if you were exercising good gun safety. So we don't know who handled that gun before. We don't know who put the gun in the bag. Now, the plastic bag itself really doesn't have much significance. It was like a Publix bag, very thin. It would not obstruct the trigger in any way. So it's not like it would have required greater resistance because it was in a bag.
Well, also, if you're going to cock the gun, you're presumably taking it out of the bag to cock it.
Well,
You're not cocking it in the bag. That's bizarre.
Wait, are you saying that it was cocked when he got it? So it was in the console already cocked?
He's saying that's a possibility.
I think that may be what is argued, is that it was already cocked in the bag and that he simply placed it on his lap. In other words, when he perceives this danger, he requests the gun, it is handed back to him. And by the way, nobody protested that. Neither Diane nor Danny Joe said, Tex, why, what's the deal? We don't need, there's nothing out there going on that would require a gun. So they must have shared that same sense of danger that he did because they didn't protest.
Yeah, and you can see that bottle of wine in those pictures. Rachel, they had been drinking beforehand. Do you think the defense will bring that up, that potentially this is a guy who has alcohol in his system? He is scared. They are driving through a neighborhood that concerns him. He's got a gun in his lap. He falls asleep, Could the alcohol have influenced his reaction when he finally jolted awake?
Absolutely. I think slower reaction times, alcohol, especially wine, making you a little bit sleepy. I'd expect all of that is something the defense is absolutely going to bring up. In the police interrogation, though, Tex did say he didn't have much wine at the time that night.
Well, and potentially he didn't remember, because we also heard the waiter saying they took a whole bottle from the restaurant. And Danny Jo Carter said that he had been drinking. Let's listen to a clip from Danny Jo Carter as she explains how he reacted after he shot his wife.
Now, did you know where the closest emergency room was?
Not at that. No, not.
Did you have any thoughts about what emergency room you wanted to go to? Did you have any thoughts about what emergency room you wanted to go to?
Piedmont Hospital was the only hospital that I was sitting on Piedmont Road.
I understand.
Piedmont Hospital is not on Piedmont Road.
And as you were sitting on Piedmont Road, understanding that Piedmont Hospital isn't on Piedmont Road, did you know how to get there from where you were?
No.
Did you express that thought to the defendant?
No, I just asked him where the closest emergency room was.
And what did he say?
He said, Emory, we should go to Emory. And I said, you're going to have to tell me how to go, which way to get there, because I don't know.
Now, how would you describe kind of your state of mind at that time?
I wanted to panic, but I knew that I couldn't.
And so, did you look over at Diane McIver? Did you say anything to her? Did you attempt to assist her? Anything like that?
Yes, I looked over at her and called her name. I called Diane.
You actually looked at her?
Yes.
And what does she look like?
She was breathing really. She was breathing really hard, and kind of like panicky.
Okay. And did you say anything to her?
I called her name, and just that a couple of times, and then I realized that if I was going to drive, I couldn't drive and look at her.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors, what did the defendant say, and what did he do?
He leaned forward and was holding her head with both hands and was saying, Diane, Diane.
Tex McIver says, Diane, Diane, and then he proceeds to hold his wife's head up so she can breathe while her best friend drives to a hospital, Emory Hospital. Is that an appropriate reaction? And does it even matter how this man reacts in the moment? Can we read into it and ascribe intent before the fact to his behavior after the fact?
I always have difficulty when the prosecution, or the defense for that matter, tries to use someone's reaction to a horrific event as evidence of guilt or innocence, because it is so difficult to predict how someone will react when something like this happens. What was he remained calm? He didn't panic, and he held her up. I don't know. Does that prove he's guilty? I don't know. Would I be screaming? Maybe, but he didn't.
Charles, what about the fact that he shot her in the back when, if he really wanted to kill her and have her die immediately, maybe he would have aimed for a different area like the head or the neck?
Precisely. I mean, if you're going to claim it's an accidental shooting, then go for some sort of, go for a vital organ, go for the head. I've looked at the ballistics in this case, and there was no guarantee that would have caused any sort of fatal injury to Diane. In fact, it's completely consistent with a gun that would have been resting at lap level on his lap, and and also this reaction after. There's been so much made in this case about the fact that they didn't go to Grady versus going to Emory. Mm-hmm. And I actually participated in a recreation last Friday with Vinnie Politan, where we actually drove the exact route where they got off the expressway. And believe it or not, from the point where they realized that she was shot, Emory is actually closer. Emory is 3.2 miles away, and Grady is 3.4 miles away in the opposite direction. So that is going to be a fact, I'm sure, that the defense is going to seize upon. It's something that you haven't really heard, and I was actually kind of shocked to discover that myself when we drove it.
At the same time that the prosecution has these emergency room nurses and doctors analyzing how many tears he shed, some of them also testified that Diane herself, one doctor said this was an accident, that Tex himself, when describing this to some of the nurses there, said this was an accident. Do you think that that testimony sort of outweighs all of this analysis about his grieving and his emotional reaction at the hospital?
The testimony of the nurses?
From the nurses and the doctors saying, listen, he told us it was an accident, because this is a recounting now from the people who were involved in the moments after it happened of what happened. So if you're going to analyze somebody's tears and somebody's emotional reaction, don't you also have to analyze how they depicted what went down?
Yeah, but you know what? I also have a problem with the fact that he told Danny Jo, the sole witness, that she should lie and say she wasn't in the car at the time. So if you're going to take in what the nurses and the doctors said, you also have to take that into consideration. I think that will be very troubling for the jurors. However, is it enough, as we've said, as Charles and I and you, Amy, have said over and over again, is it enough to prove intent?
Yeah, Charles, what do you think? The fact that he's trying to, basically what the prosecution says, is stage a cover-up. That's what it amounts to, according to them.
It is problematic, and that's the real challenge for the defense. Again, it's Tex McIver's own actions that have been problematic from the beginning, and I think really got him to this point. But I think that the jury will be able to differentiate between the prosecution's theory and their attempt to try to spin all this into a murder case versus what is realistically a manslaughter, a reckless conduct case with a guy who has tried to control the narrative and has made some really bad decisions and engaged in witness tampering along the way.
Charles, you brought up a good point when we were in the break, saying, well, if they're trying to paint this guy as somebody who is cold and calculating, then why is he boggling the case afterward by getting himself in trouble with the law even further by witness tampering?
Right. You can't have it both ways. So this testimony that we heard from Ann Schwall, now the prosecution is going to look at it and say, well, you know, it's on one hand, they will argue that he went ahead and changed his will because he was concerned about the appearances and the financial motive if he didn't. But yet, on all sorts of other aspects of the evidence, they're going to argue that he this bizarre and strange behavior shows his guilt. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either he's this manipulative, calculating guy, and he's choreographed this entire thing, or he hasn't. But you can't really have it both ways. And I think they're going to have the jury is going to have to sort that out, and that's going to be the Achilles heel for this prosecution.
Yeah, there's a lot of twists and turns. There's also a lot of reasonable doubt. But as we just saw, the case shifted in favor of the defense. Will it shift back? Well, they're at a lunch break now, but we are expecting more live testimony to come up very shortly. They will be returning in a matter of minutes. So stay with us as we cover the Tex McIver trial out of Atlanta. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live. I'm your host, Amy Dash, and I'm here with our editor-in-chief, Rachel Stockman. You know, we have cameras in the courtrooms all across the country, and often we are covering multiple trials, and we're bouncing back and forth between the most exciting testimony, and we're giving in-depth analysis. We're kind of like the red zone for the crime and justice fans out here.
Absolutely, and we're actually streaming the penalty phase of a really, really interesting trial that's going on in Texas involving this guy, Leon Jacob.
Yeah, people can catch that on our website. Leon Jacob, he was a former Houston doctor that was convicted on Friday of solicitation to murder his ex-girlfriend and his new girlfriend's ex-husband.
It's a very convoluted story, and I'm telling you, Amy, this is like out of some kind of movie, but it's real life.
But he actually took the stand, and after 4 full days of testimony, it only took the jury 1 hour to convict him. Let's recap some of those events from last week.
Accused of arranging a murder-for-hire plot to kill his ex-girlfriend and his current lover's ex-husband, took the stand in his own defense on the 3rd day of testimony. Leon Jacob testified he only hired a private investigator who turned out to be an undercover police officer to investigate his ex-girlfriend, Megan Veritas, not to kill her, as the state contends.
It was to finalize some plans that I had had with somebody I had thought to be a private investigator.
The defendant says Valerie McDaniel arranged for the services of the hitman, and he was not fully aware of the specifics.
I never asked to have anybody hurt, killed, harmed, kidnapped. I never asked for anybody to be in any way physically hurt.
And he stressed how he still loved Megan.
I think that when you give your heart to somebody for such a long time, that part of you always still loves them.
But during cross-examination, the defendant took exception to the prosecutor's attempts to sully his character.
So when you tell the members of this jury that you're heartsick over Megan, that's not really true, is it? Because it sure didn't take you long to move on, did it?
Matters of the heart and how you feel are subject to the way you feel at a moment. I mean, you're asking me to get up here and say that I'm some womanizer. That's fine. You can characterize me as that. It doesn't make me guilty of solicitation of capital murder. I have no problem sitting here and saying that I slept with Valerie 7 days after Megan and I broke up. But I'm not on trial for being a womanizer. I'm on trial for solicitation of capital murder. So you can assassinate my character all you want up here. It doesn't make me guilty of what you've charged me with.
The prosecutor also questioned the defendant's testimony that he did not want to hurt anyone.
I never asked for anybody to be hurt or kidnapped, correct?
True.
But that's not true, right? Because you told Javier, snatch her, put her in a room, and tell her if she doesn't leave, I'm going to kill her parents, right?
If that's what you say, I said.
Did you say it, Mr. Jacob?
Sure.
Shortly after the testimony, the case and Jacob's fate was in the hands of the jury. After less than 2 hours, the jury came back with a guilty verdict.
State of Texas versus Leon Philip Jacob. We, the jury, find the defendant Leon Philip Jacob guilty of solicitation of capital murder as charged in the indictment signed by the foreman of the jury. Cause number 1543812. We, the jury, find the defendant Leon Philip Jacob guilty of solicitation of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
The sentencing phase begins this week. The defendant faces life in prison. This is Rachel Stockman for Law and Crime.
Wow, no real emotion as that verdict was read, and you can watch the penalty phase, the hearing, on our website, lawandcrime.com. Now we're going to get back to the trial of Tex McIver. He is a prominent Atlanta attorney. There's some activity in the courtroom, though the jurors are not back yet. Rachel, you saw in that previous package, it really backfired when the defendant took the stand. We were just discussing whether or not Tex should. My question is, has he gained enough sympathy from the jury, considering that there was so much testimony to the fact that maybe he didn't care that his wife died? That's where the prosecution was going with this. Does he need to get up there and explain how much he loved his wife?
No.
How devastated he was.
Absolutely. In my opinion, it would be a big mistake for the defense attorneys to put Tex McIver on the stand, because we've already had witness after witness testifying how much Tex McIver loved his wife Diane and how they weren't having any problems leading up to this shooting. So what could he possibly add to that? On the reverse, what could end up happening is during cross-examination, he could get, as I mentioned before, absolutely hammered, could get tongue-tied. And the truth is, some of his actions after the shooting don't make any sense whatsoever. And how is he going to explain that to jurors so it's believable? Would be a big mistake.
Yeah, and so there was also a lot of focus in terms of actions after she died, that he almost immediately, within a few months, auctioned off all of her jewelry, all of her clothing. Is that neither here? It's neither here nor there for me. I mean, why do you think that that's relevant to the prosecution's motive here? I mean, they're saying that it was all financial, that he wanted to get his hands on the money. What's he going to do with jewelry and clothing? What's he going to do with fur coats?
Well, that's why he wanted to sell it, to get his hands on the money. That's the prosecution's case right there. But, yeah, is it suspect?
But that's normal course of business, wouldn't you say? After somebody dies, you have to settle the estate. You have to give off the belongings. They did not have children to leave these belongings down to.
I don't know what's the normal course of events when millionaires, one of them gets offed, in terms of in terms of how fast you're going to settle the estate.
In terms of timing, yeah.
In terms of timing. It happened very, very quickly, I will say. I mean, it was just a matter of months. Usually, would it take longer? I guess. Does it prove that he wanted to kill her to get all her money? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, but what does it show about his attachment to her? A lot of people say if he holds on to things, it shows that he's not quite done grieving yet. He also didn't pick up her remains for about 40-something days. He claims it was because he had to get a bank account for the estate first so that he could pay for it, so that he didn't have the funds.
So you're saying the fact he didn't want to hold on to all her expensive jewelry and expensive purses means he didn't want her keepsakes and wasn't grieving the loss of this woman well enough? I don't know. That doesn't sound like...
it seems to me if you're on the jury, you're not buying it.
If I was on the jury, no. But again, there are a sequence of events we've gone over them and over again this morning that raise serious questions. You don't tell someone to lie if you're innocent.
Right. But what about the argument that Diane was worth more to him alive than dead? Because she did make a substantial living. In fact, she even lent him money.
Yeah, that's the thing about this. He was actually surprised, and this came in as evidence. One of the witnesses testified to the fact. He was surprised she didn't actually have as much money as he thought in her bank account. So the theory that he wanted her money doesn't quite add up, because she was worth more to him bringing in a monthly paycheck every month.
Even though they kept the finances separate.
Well, right, because he was getting the loan off of her.
Yeah, but she was charging interest, which is a little bit bizarre. Well, Rachel, I want to thank you, Rachel Stockman, Editor-in-Chief of Law and Crime Live. Thank you so much for being with us. We are going to head back to the trial after this short commercial break. Rachel, before you go, how many more witnesses do you think the prosecution will put up? It seems they're being very exhaustive here, and we haven't seen a lot of substance so far.
Yeah, I'd expect this. At first, we thought maybe the defense would start their case this week. That's what we were all expecting. I don't see that happening now. I think the prosecution's case is going to go through well this week. The judge already said they're going to take a week off in April during spring break, the first week of April, and then they're going to probably put the defense's case up. So it's going to be a while with more of these prosecution witnesses. We'll hopefully see more of their case as the hours progress.
And there is a prosecution witness on the stand. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we will come back and listen to this live testimony. You cannot hear or see this type of trial coverage anywhere else, so you want to stay with us here at Law and Crime Live on the Crime and Investigation channel, and we will be back right after this.